Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Irvin, also known as Kubumo, and welcome. Good to see you on my secondary channel. Today, I want to talk about DHCP, which stands for Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. So we got Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. And the reason I'm highlighting this is because it's very important to pay attention to what each letter means. Dynamic means that it's something that can change dynamically, meaning also randomly and on its own, right? And then we got a host. In this case, host means a computer. When you have a computer that's connected, for example, on a network or just your personal computer, it's going to have a name. Host also is the same thing. So it's either host or a computer name, sometimes known as a workstation name. So that's the same thing. And then we got configuration. We know what configuration is. It's to configure something, to set up something, to make something work, right? And then we get a word named protocol, and that's just protocol. Like, for example, if you're following a protocol, that means you're following a set of rules. These are the rules for this dynamic host configuration protocol. So that's what that describes. Now let's visually kind of talk about how DHCP works. And the reason I'm making these videos using this is because it's kind of a trial thing and see how it works. So DHCP can be a couple of different things. For example, if you were to equate what DHCP server is, I'm going to make a little box here. Let's make it green. And then we're going to call it DHCP server. Okay, we're going to call it a DHCP server. I'm going to make the letters black so it's easier to understand. And so in this scenario, DHCP server is simply in your home environment. It's your router or your internet modem. So if you have internet modem, that's a combo, meaning that your internet modem is also your router. Like, you can physically connect a cable to it and then cable to your computer. So a network cable directly plugged into that and then your computer, or it's Wi-Fi. Like, so it can be also Wi-Fi. Some people have a separate router that you take your modem and you plug it into, and then that router acts as a DHCP server. So how is this related to Wi-Fi and your network? Well, DHCP server, in this case your router, your modem, or a switch, assigns IP addresses to your computers, to computers that are connected to it, in order to provide access to other networks. In this case, if your DHCP server is, and I'm going to type it in here, modem / router, then it provides an IP address. DHCP server provides an IP address to your computer, your phone. So let's say you're connected with the Wi-Fi to your phone, to your tablet, provides an IP address to it so it can access internet or your network, your local network. But let's just go with the home setup, where if you connect to Wi-Fi, you get an IP address from the DHCP server, which in this case is your modem or a router, so it can access internet. But the main purpose of getting an IP address is to be identified on a network. In this case, the network is the internet, right? The internet. You can have a local network, which in your case would be everybody that's connected to that router at your home locally. So that's going to create a local network, but then internet is the other network, which is the extended network. And for those reasons, your computers, your laptops, your phones need to be identified. And this is done by the DHCP server dynamically assigning an IP address. So keep in mind that dynamic in this case means that it can be a random IP address based usually on availability. So if you have an IP address starting with, say, 192 168.1.1. Let's say that's the IP address of this DHCP server. Matter of fact, let's do this here. Let's use the tools here. And forgive me, I'm still trying to figure out the best way to go about performing this type of presentation, right? So I'm going to put it all in one bubble, and I hope this makes sense. Here we go. The address for the DHCP server, because you got to have the DHCP server itself has to be identified on the network as well, because it's also technically a computer or a component, right? So its address is, for example, 192.168.1.1, right? So that's its IP address. With dynamically assigned IP addresses, next thing that connects to this server, and we're going to create a component here. I'm going to call it my computer. Now, when this thing just bear with me here for a moment. Pen. Okay. When this computer here connects to the server, like so, when it connects to it, it's going to get next available IP address, which is, this is why it's called Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, and it's going to be getting probably 192.168.1, and the next available one is, you guessed it right, it's 2. So this is what this computer is going to get. And then we've get, another computer that connects to it, whether it's tablet, phone, whatever, it's going to get the next one in line, which is 3, right? And let's kind of make another one for the sake of presentation, because I want you to see what happens when you disconnect one of them. So this is we're going to call this one tablet. Sure, let's call it a tablet. And now tablet is connected. Let me do another arrow here. Now tablet is also connected to the DHCP server. So DHCP server gives it the next available IP address, which is 192.168.1.3, right? Because each component on the network has to be identified by its unique IP address. And this is important at this point, because you gotta have, well, not only do you have to identify each computer that's on the network. Now keep in mind, these type of IP addresses are for a local network. All of this is a local network. When it comes to getting access to the internet, the DHCP server routes your computer, your IP addresses to the internet using a gateway, and that is called a gateway IP address. And I'm going to type it in also, gateway. So your router is also your gateway to the internet, right? And the gateway IP address is going to be this. It's going to be the same as the router IP address. So if you were to do on your computer, if you open up a command line and type in ipconfig /all, check all these settings. And you may have different IP addresses, but they would correlate and be the same setup as the way I'm showing you right now. All right, so let me go back to the part where now we have a situation where we have 3 network components that are controlled by a centralized DHCP server. In this case, it's a modem or a router, and they all are identified with IP addresses, which is 198, 168. We got 1, we got 2, and then we got 3. So that's great. Now, if we happen to disconnect both of these computers from the network, for example, I just delete, they suddenly lose an IP address, right? They are now disconnected. My computer and tablet is disconnected. So what's going to happen if tablet connects now first to the DHCP server, gets Wi-Fi signal, and it's going to get an IP address, of course, right? Because we have to identify it. It has to be identified. It's going to be .192.168.1.2. All right. So now this one, instead of having .3, has .2. Why is that? Well, because my computer is not connected to the Wi-Fi and tablet connected first. And when it comes to DHCP server, it's first come, first serve. Remember, this one used to have this IP address because it was connected first. So it gets that next IP address in line. But now, tablet connected before it, so it gets the next available IP address. So it's first come, first serve basis when it comes to DHCP. So this is great for networks that do not need a static IP address. These are dynamic. Again, dynamic meaning they can change at any time, and they will change depending on availability and first come, first serve. Now, if you want to add a printer to this DHCP server, you can certainly do so. And let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to make it a box, I think. Make it a box printer. And just like the other components, it will get next available IP address, which is probably okay at your home network, but it may not be a good idea to begin with. Now, if your network printer is added to your computer based off its name, not an IP address, that's perfectly fine. You don't have to worry about IP addresses changing at random. You don't have to worry about that because there is a thing called DNS. DNS is called Domain Name System, and I'll talk about that in a future video, so you make sure you subscribe. But DNS handles of routing to correct IP address based off a printer name or a computer name, so you don't have to worry about the IP address. So if the printer is added with its name, which again is also known as host name, in this case printer is also a computer, then it doesn't matter necessarily whether it's configured dynamically, right? And this is okay on a home network probably. But what you really want to do is assign this printer a static IP address, static IP address, and you can create those static IP addresses when you log into the DHCP server, which is this here in the center. So you can go in and create a static IP address and assign it to the printer. Why? Because static means that it doesn't change. So I go inside of DHCP server and then I create a special IP address for it, and you can, whatever's available in your router, you can pick a lot of them. So in this case, I'm just going to make it 100. Just a moment. So I'm going to make it this 198.168.1.100, and it doesn't change. But you have to go inside of DHCP server and create a static IP address that you can assign to your printer. Normally in a business environment, you would have a static IP address for printers and servers, because you don't want them to change, and you always want to have the same IP address for them in case DNS does not work, right? This is why I said, if you want to add your printer based off the host name, you don't have to figure out what the IP address is when you add it to your computer, right? Because this printer is on the network, right? It's not directly plugged into your computer at all. It's on the network somewhere, and you're adding it over the network. And to identify where it's at, you normally need an IP address, right? And if it changes all the time, then it's a problem. Just like in this tablet and my computer scenario, because they can be unplugging, plug-in, your printer can go offline, this and that. You have to make sure that it has a static IP address. Which reminds me, I probably should let Javier know, because in my other on my other channel I do help desk tickets, and he asked me about printers, and it seemed like he had network issues. But now that I think about it, he probably needs to set up a static IP address. Anyways, so this is how DHCP server functions, and this is what it's used for. I hope this is fairly easy to understand. I'm trying to think if there was anything else I wanted to talk about in regards to this, so it's easy to kind of understand. I really think that covers it. These are some simple network tutorial, I suppose, where you could just kind of learn how these basic components function. Very useful if you're trying to get into IT, in my opinion. So, and if you're wondering how to get to your router, you just have to figure out what the router is, what the router IP address is, or your modem IP address is. And again, you can do that by going to your command line and type in ipconfig/all. Easy way to find where your router is by looking at the gateway. So once you figure out what the gateway is, simply go to your router and type in this IP address. And that's where it's located. You might have some other stuff behind it, for example, /admin login or whatever. It's going to depend on your router. But normally you'd want to Google this information anyways, just to make sure that you not only have the correct IP address, which is definitely going to be determined by your gateway, but that you have the correct login for that, because you have to have login to log into the router and make changes to it. I think that's all. I think that's all I want to talk about in this. I've talked about why it's called DHCP. It's called Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, and how it works, and why you would need an IP address that doesn't change all the time. And let's just do one thing as a last thing. Let's connect the computer 192.168.1.3. So it's going to have the next available IP address now, and that's how that works. All right, let me know if you like it in the comments below, and please subscribe, because this channel, I think it only has 300 subscribers at this time, and that would really help out to at least get it to 1,000, and then I'm going to stop asking people to subscribe. But either way, this is my secondary channel. My main channel always has the main content, and all is good there. All right, I hope you have a wonderful day. Best of luck to you and your family. Take care. Bye-bye.